Hello, welcome to this special conversation with Nigeria's Finance Minister, Kemi Adeosunamwole Famurua. Thank you for joining us. Over the next half hour or so, we'll be talking through Nigeria's economic recession and the moves to take it out of recession, and of course, the latest fundraising moves by the ministry. Honorable Minister, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for your time. I was saying before this interview that you must be living on the plane over the last few weeks. Very busy days for you, but fortunately, we've been able to close what I imagine is one of your highlights in this year, the Eurobond issue. Can you just speak to the conversations you had with investors? What was the presentation you were making to investors during this roadshow?
Well, thank you very much for coming in. Our narrative to the investors is the same narrative really we've been explaining to the Nigerian public really for the last year, which is that we needed a reset of the Nigerian economy. In particular, we needed to focus very much on infrastructure. We believe that to unlock the Nigerian economy properly, to get away from this dependence on oil, for government revenues, we needed to invest in enabling infrastructure. And to do that, we were doing two things. One was to raise revenues by improving our revenue collection, improving our revenue efficiency. And two was to reduce our expenditure, particularly recurrent expenditure, so a lot of efficiency savings, taking people off payroll that shouldn't be on payroll, to create that headroom for infrastructure, because the thinking is that if we get infrastructure right, so many other areas of Nigerian economy can become productive and create jobs and wealth opportunities for the people and grow the economy sustainably. So that was really the narrative that the investors embraced on our roadshow.
Right. But some people I spoke to who were in the room suggested that the big elephant in the room was still the forex issue in Nigeria. We know that the central bank has adopted a flexible process to the allocation of foreign exchange, but many are suggesting that it's not working ideally. Of course, when you look at the parallel market rate today at the all-time low of 516, what was your message to investors in that respect?
Well, the central bank themselves were in the room. And they spoke of their need to fine-tune. They spoke of their need to fine-tune the implementation of their policy. I think their explanation to investors was that the policy itself was a good one, was well crafted, but the implementation had been suboptimal, and that was what CBNs themselves explained to investors who raised that very question.
Right. But now let's get back to the Eurobond itself. $1 billion was expected that Nigeria would be able to issue that. Were you happy with the rate, 7.85?
Yeah, I mean, it was within the range of what we were expecting to attain. If you look at our fundamentals and you look at how the market was trading, it was within the range. What was pleasing for us was the ability to extend the yield out to 15 years,
right,
which is an important benchmark for our corporates. So that was, you know, we were originally looking at 10, hoping for 15, but happy to have taken 15.
And the usage of the proceeds, can you just provide some clarity on that?
Capital projects in the 2016 budget. This
right,
is the 2016
right,
Eurobond is to
right,
fund the 2016.
Right. So none of this is going into the official markets to boost
Oh,
forex
absolutely
supply?
not. Absolutely not.
Okay.
This is to fund capital projects. We've
right,
got lots and lots of projects ready to go. We've got rail projects where we need to pay counterpart funding. We have road projects. We have power projects. We have water resources projects, interior projects, defense projects. So I've got a huge pile of files waiting for capital spend. So that's what this is for.
So now we have the Eurobond out of the way. Tell us more about the other fundraising plans, especially offshore funding. There have been some talk around Nigeria working with the World Bank to raise capital. Can you just tell us where that deal is right now?
Okay, so when we started last year, and we had always said that the first money we would raise, external money, would be concessional money, because that was the cheapest money and the most cost-effective money for us, and we've stuck to that. So we've secured, as you know, $1 billion offer from the ADB, of which we've drawn down $600 million. And with the World Bank, we're hoping to begin the process. Well, we've already started the process of talking to them about funding the 2017 budget with a budget support facility. We've also had got an offer, a few offers, but a large one from the China Exim Bank to fund the rail project, Lagos to Kano, but the first phase is Lagos to Ibadan, of about 1.3 billion. And myself and the Minister of Transport are hoping to go and sign that loan in the forthcoming months. So our efforts around external funding have been ongoing and have been fairly successful. We've been able to do all the things we set out to do at the beginning of the year.
And the World Bank, where are you on that deal?
World Bank will be 2017. So what happened with the World Bank was we started World Bank and ADB together last year, and they did a joint mission. But when we did the currency adjustment, the amount of dollars or the amount of external money we could borrow reduced. So because we were further ahead with the ADB, we decided to close that transaction, which we did, with the $1 billion of which, as I said, we've drawn down 600, and then spoke to the World Bank and said, look, let's move yours into 2017, right, which is what we're now doing.
So what are we expecting to raise from the World Bank?
At least $1 billion.
Right.
And then there's some possibility of doing a sector-specific intervention in the power sector. They're working very closely with us on power. They sent down their high-level power team. We spent 2 very useful days here in Abuja dimensioning the problems in the power sector, and there's a possibility of some support specifically for power.
There have been some reports in the media that Nigeria has actually closed the transaction with the World Bank, $2.5 billion. Can you comment on that?
No.
So no closure yet?
No, but it's all in process.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Then, I think an interesting conversation I had with former Finance Minister Kalude Kakalu recently. He made the point that why isn't Nigeria going to the IMF? Because the IMF will give you money at 0%. Why is the IMF not an option for Nigeria? Well,
I mean, this is a huge national debate, and for us, the IMF is really your lender of last resort when you have a balance of payments problem. Nigeria doesn't have a balance of payments problem per se. It has a fiscal problem, which is that its major revenue sources lost so much value. First of all, lost price and then lost quantity. And so the challenges are different. And now what the IMF does for you is they give you a program of reforms. We're already doing as much reform as any IMF program would impose on Nigeria. So my question is that what would that bring that we're not already doing? What measures would be introduced that we're not already doing? Nigerians want to take responsibility for their future, and we must have a homegrown, home-designed program of reforms that Nigerians take ownership of, because they're painful reforms. When you go through this type of adjustment of your economy, the reforms are very painful, and I think they've got to be homegrown. We've got to take responsibility for this ourselves so that when it succeeds, Nigerians are able to say, yes, we did this. I'm not saying that the IMF are bad, but I'm just saying right now we don't see that need. We feel that this is a problem that Nigerians created one way or another, and Nigerians must solve.
Well, would you say that all the foreign debt-raising programs that you have in the pipeline now will provide enough foreign capital for the projects that you want to do?
I think there are 2 issues. One is that, you see, we have a deep domestic capital market, and that's always got to be tapped first. And then you supplement it with money from the external market. I think the acceptance of our Eurobond shows that there is appetite for Nigeria. So I don't have any concerns with our ability to raise money in the external capital markets. I like the flexibility that it gives us. It means that if our fiscal position improves, we can pay down. We can put a sinking fund together towards paying off debt, redeeming debt. But I think there's adequate funds. There are adequate funds to fund what we need.
Let's get to the Economic Recovery and Growth Plan. And I know the acting president was at Davos in January. He said it will be unveiled fully in February. We have heard a little bit in terms of detail, but perhaps not everything that everyone is hoping to get. When can we anticipate the finer details of that plan?
I think you have to ask the Minister for Budget and National Planning and his team, who are really coordinating that effort. Right. But I mean, I've seen it. It's being fine-tuned, and I'm sure imminently you'll get.
And coming back to the issue of fundraising, there has been this debate across the country around selling assets, asset realizations. Indeed, the last time we spoke, you suggested that was a good idea. Is that still on the table?
Of course, you've got to look at all options. When you have a fiscal challenge and you have a gap, a budget funding gap, you've got to look at all the options. If you have idle assets, and we do have some, that can be realized or can be put to better use, of course you have to look at that option. And we are continuing to consider all options, including asset realization. But the talk about specific assets, no. But the asset sales as a principle, absolutely yes.
Right, because I think many will expect that if it indeed is a policy or a program that this government is embracing, it needs to be planned strategically. So I'm thinking, when we do see the final details of this economic recovery and growth plan, will we see details of an asset realization program?
Well, I'm not sure the detail to which you will go. I can't speak to that, but what I'm saying is that that is an option. Realizing underutilized assets that have value is always an option.
Right. Well, let's talk a bit about where the government is in terms of revenues. We've seen the oil price pick up to well over 50, and it's been stable at that level recently. What we're hearing is that oil production also has improved. Would you say Nigeria is in a much better place today?
I get concerned when people talk about oil, because it's exactly that put us in this position, this sort of over-reliance on oil. Oil is only 10% of our GDP. The question I'd like you to ask me is, how is non-oil revenue looking? And I'll tell you that non-oil revenue, that's the most important revenue, because that's the most stable revenue. That's improving very steadily, and the measures that we put in place are beginning to yield fruit. In terms of oil production, yes, you're right. Oil production is back up, and we're very grateful for that. And oil price is favourable and looks stable. But I think we should be very careful about getting excited about it.
I think one reason why oil revenues continues to be central in terms of people's expectations from the government's fiscal plan is that it's still a huge chunk of it.
Absolutely.
But, okay, so let's move on to the conversation around the non-oil revenues. How is that working?
Well, you know, that's one of the more difficult things to do, and that's where a lot of energy is being exercised. So far, Federal Inland Revenue Service have enrolled about 825,000 new taxpayers or taxpayers who have underpaid their tax. There's a lot of effort going on around tax mobilization, because you see, oil is only 10% of our GDP. The question is, why is the other 90% of the economy contributing so little? That's really the challenge that we're trying to fix. So there's a lot of work going on in FIRS, there's a lot of work going on in customs around better reconciliation, better customs collection, and there's a lot of work going on in the third tier, which is the independent revenues that are coming in from the various agencies, to bring them in and to get them paying the operating surpluses that they generate. I think for me that's always much more exciting.
And what type of growth are you anticipating with
well,
these
you see,
programs?
those are, as I say, those are much more difficult to do, because you know you wake up tomorrow and the oil price has changed and suddenly your revenues have changed. That's easy, and it's exogenous. We don't control it. The endogenous ones, the ones that we do control, are the ones that are much harder to do, because for many years people have been used in Nigeria to not paying tax. Yeah. We have a 6% tax to GDP ratio. It's one of the lowest in the world. I think Ghana's at 15, and South Africa's at 24. We're at 6. So, you know, getting people to change their attitude, getting people to realize that you have to pay taxes, putting those measures in place that mean that you can't get money out of government if you owe us taxes. Those are more difficult to do, but more long term. And then efforts are working.
Incidentally, I was speaking to the governor of Ogun State recently, and he did make a point about the progress they are making in terms of getting taxes from the informal sector, and I thought that was quite interesting. And your perspective on that, the opportunity for the FIRS to really tap the informal sector in Nigeria?
It's important. Everybody, you know, every formal, informal, non-formal, everybody's got to pay their share of taxes if we really want this economy to grow. Every area that generates a value in the economy must pay its fair share. So we're looking at everything. As you know, we just had our tax policy approved. We're looking at how we put up VAT on certain luxury items. We're looking at how we introduce certain new taxes and bring in tax reform. But tax reform is front and center for this administration.
Well, you can't give me an expectation in terms of growth, in terms of how all these will translate to growth in non-tax revenue, non-oil revenue.
It's quite difficult. If the economy hadn't been challenged with growth, it'd be easier to predict. The challenge you have is, even though you put in these measures, you have companies that are making losses. Sure. You can't tax companies that are making losses. So I think 2017 in terms of revenue is not going to be give us the sort of clarity we would like. But what my point is that as far as tax administration is concerned, actually the data is more important than the values. Getting people into the net is the most difficult thing. Once they're in the net, you can tax them. But if you're not in the net, and many people in Nigeria have not been in the net for many years, they just don't pay the right taxes. Right. And that's something we're looking to correct.
Right. I want us to talk to the TSA. Recently, you've been reported to have commented on that and plan to expand that. Can you just speak to first of all, what we have been able to achieve with the TSA program and that plan to expand the TSA program?
I mean, the first phase of the TSA was to get all government money out of commercial banks into the central bank. And we've been quite successful at that. We're still having challenges with one or two banks. We're working with them on that, where they haven't remitted funds that they know to have belonged to federal government. Interestingly, our whistleblower program actually picked up a lot of that. A lot of whistleblower tips were actually from people in banks saying that bankers were being instructed to rename accounts when they knew that those monies belonged to the federal government. So we've written to all the bank MDs to say, look, if you're in doubt, disclose. But if we now discover that you had willfully concealed federal government money, then we're working with the central bank to ensure that that such act should be sanctioned. So we're working to make sure, first of all, we get all our money in. We're not convinced yet that all the money is in. The second phase of the TSA, of course, is then looking at the data that TSA gives us. That's the real value. Being able to see which agencies are generating what money. What is it for? How is it being used? What's the rate at which money is coming in? What's the rate at which money is going out? Are people sticking to their budgets in how they spend? So that's the second phase of the TSA, which is what we're really trying to now develop. But the first phase really was just getting everybody to comply, which is still something of a challenge, but I think we're making a lot of progress.
What about the infrastructure spending plan? A lot of this foreign capital that you're raising is supposed to go into infrastructure. So what are the priority areas? Recently, we've been hearing a lot from the Minister of Power, you could call him Minister of Infrastructure. He's been speaking to many of the road projects that they've been trying to complete. Would you say that that is the big priority right now? Because others will suggest that the power sector really needs...
Power is, and I mentioned to you the work that's going on with the World Bank specifically on power. Power is very critical. But power has a lot of moving parts. Road projects are a lot easier to do. You simply mobilize the contractor and get them to... Power is one of the sectors where a lot of thought, a lot of detail, a lot of planning has to go in, and that work is ongoing, I can assure you. In fact, there's a weekly meeting that happens on power, which involves the NNPC, the presidency, the finance, CBN, power. So there's a lot of, and all the agencies to work out so that we have a proper roadmap for the power sector. So power is critical. As you've said, road projects, rail projects, because there's no point in doing roads if you don't do rail. One of the reasons why our roads don't last is that we carry everything by road. If you want to enable solid minerals and agriculture, you've got to do rail. So there's roads, there's rail, there's water resources, which is equally very critical for agriculture and also, for urban living. So we've got a lot of projects, and I'm sure you know the statistics about how big our infrastructure gap is. The government can't do it alone. We had always said we would point the way, but then we now need to look at how we bring in and partner with the private sector to begin to take on infrastructure projects.
Would you say the environment is great for private sector participation now, especially when you consider many of the complaints around the forex policy, because we know a lot of this capital is going to come from abroad?
I disagree with you about capital coming from abroad.
Okay.
I think that a lot of capital is here in Nigeria, but the thing is, the same concerns that foreign, in fact, high net worth Nigerian investors behave exactly the same as foreign investors. It's all about confidence. It's confidence in the macro picture. And that's what we've got to now rebuild. And I told you that CBN said they're going to fine tune their policy. I think they've started to do certain measures. They are independent, but we are working quite closely with them to ensure we harmonize and get these things sorted out. But the truth is that a foreign investor follows domestic money. If Nigerians, high net worth Nigerians are not investing, no foreigner is going to come and take that risk. So the thing is, we've got to work on the stability of the macro picture, get the macro fundamental story out. And that macro fundamental story remains very sound. Nigeria is in transition. We've had a fiscal shock. There are going to be dislocations in the economy as we begin to adjust, but I'm confident that as the year rolls out, many of these problems are short-term problems. We'll solve them, and those who are fundamentally confident in the Nigerian story for the medium and long term will begin to invest again. And we're already seeing that. We had some very interesting meetings in New York with conglomerates that are buying into Nigerian companies. These transactions take a long time. They want to meet you. They want to get to know what your plans are.
So you're optimistic we'll see?
Oh yeah, I've always been optimistic.
This year?
Absolutely. Absolutely, because you know, a multinational taking over a Nigerian company, they don't just wake up and do it. It's a 6-7 months. They're doing due diligence. They're keeping, but there's a lot happening.
Final question will be around the state of the states, the fiscal position of the states. We've seen the government provide some fiscal support in the past. Now we've seen a bit of an uptick in revenues. Perhaps there's a need for less support, but what's the government's position on the type of support you're providing to the states?
So the support we provided, the budget support program, is a conditional support program. And it was against a reform program, 21 reforms, and we're now doing the monitoring and evaluation of those states to see where they are against their stated reforms. And the states are also aware that if they have not done what they're supposed to have done, they're cut from the project, and we've been very clear about that, and states have been forced to go back and do what they were supposed to have done. But it is a conditional support program, and what we agreed was that on any month that the FAC goes above 600 billion, we would not provide that budget support. So we're going to begin to wean. That's the ceiling basically. So once it goes above that, we take off the budget support so that we don't create a dependency. And we expect that with the reforms that states would have done, they should be in a better fiscal position. A lot of them are a lot healthier than they were. I'm sure you've seen a lot of the press around the sort of payroll cleanups that they're doing, the efficiency units that they've set up. They are a lot leaner and more rugged now going forward. And I think if they continue with the reforms, they're in better shape than they were, say, a year ago.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time. We've been speaking to Nigeria's Finance Minister, Kemi Adeosun, giving some interesting perspective on the government's capital raising plan and, of course, the broader economy. Thank you for watching. I am Wale Famrewa.